Hello everybody, so today's video is going to be about this TVR Chimaera 400. So we're lucky enough to get the opportunity to revisit a car that I used to own roughly 9 or 10 years ago. It's beautiful 1996 on an end plate, 4 litre Chimaera. So there is a bit of a story with this TVR. I bought this when I actually had another TVR Chimaera, which was a 4.3, a very early 4.3 on a K plate. And this one came up as a little bit of a project. So anybody that's familiar with TVRs know that when you say Project Chimaera, it really means the chassis is knackered on it and the outriggers are hanging off. And this one was no different. But it did have a lot of plus points at the time. You know, it ran well, the body was great in it, the roof, the interior. So between me and a friend, we bought the car as a little bit of as a project to pick away on after work. And what we've done is we've done a full body off on it. So lifted, for anybody who's not familiar, you can lift the body off these just to leave the rolling frame. The frame's quite simple and basic, it's just a whole load of tubular steel on it. So we lifted that body off, physically lifted that body off, which I should have a video of somewhere, and then got about correcting and repairing all the issues that there was with the frame, and there was a lot. So what I will do is I will do a separate video on that. I will obviously, you know, it was years ago now, but I did keep all the footage and the photographs. So I'll try and piece all that together, and that'll make a whole load more sense, the lengths we went to on the chassis of this one. But to be fair, you know, it was pretty stunning by the time it was done. So this is what we found when we took the body off. So it wasn't a nice, pleasant sight, but it was actually to be expected. You know, so this is the driver's side rear corner. So that's totally gone there. Next bit we can see, again, that's that driver's side outrigger, has just completely sheared off. I mean, it was literally just the body that was holding that outrigger in place, so it wasn't actually providing any structural support at all. That's just from another angle there, so it does look pretty spectacular when you actually look at it like that. So yeah, they do literally just fall off, you know, that's not an exaggeration. This here is the driver's side chassis rail. This is actually just below where the exhaust manifolds are, so you tend not to see this, but the exhausts tend to, what they actually just do is they just burn off the powder coating, and then water gets in and then you get corrosion. So this wasn't ideal, this part. This is the front passenger side, completely rotted out, as you can see, not much left of that one. And rear passenger side, you know, not as bad as the driver's side. You know, the outrigger still is physically in place. I wouldn't have fancied standing on it or anything, because it probably would have just come away. So yeah, that was all pretty much rotted out as well. That's just another shot of the driver's side, the crack there. And then this is again driver's side rear, just from a different angle, where you can see these little quadrants here where the chassis bolts into. You know, they do harbour water, and you can see literally where that's just rotted out. It's been a wee trap for dirt. I mean, these tend to be full. These do tend to be full of crap when you take the bodies off as well. And there you go, another angle from the front. And it's still hanging on by a thread there. And then another angle of the rear one. So at that point, we knew we were going to have to do both outriggers, the triangular sections, front and back, that support the outriggers, and the front driver's side rail where the engine was. So that was the hit list as it stood there. Right, on to the exciting part of the video now. So we sent the chassis away to be sandblasted, so we could see exactly what we're dealing with and if we had missed any corrosion anywhere else. So what you can see here is the front chassis rail under the exhaust manifolds. This is the driver's side. And there's some spectacularly poor welding here, as you can see. So we've got this from a few different angles. Now this was actually just plated. I think it was something like 0.8 mil steel from memory. Somebody had chosen to well, if you can call it welding, weld over the top. And of course, this is structural. You've got a wishbone mount there as well with all this dodgy welding around it. So yeah, absolutely nothing we could do about that other than cut that out and replace that whole section either side. So that's what we've done with that. Here you can see on this is the passenger side now, there is some corrosion in there. So we just decided that the metal was also pretty thin, so we just decided to cut that rail out of that side as well, just for safety. Here's a picture of the rail going in on the driver's side, measuring that up. And that was the old one cut off. So yeah, a good few cuts there to actually allowing the new piece to be welded in. And there you go, there's a shot of that rail welded in. So you can see the welds have been cleaned up where the rail joins at the front and the back, and they haven't been cleaned up on that upright section as of yet. And there's it from another angle. And then this is just showing where the wishbone mount was seam welded back on. So a hell of a lot stronger than what was originally on there. So yep, so that was spot on. Same process just undertaken on the passenger side chassis rail. Chop it either side, unpick it from those two uprights, and then just let in a new one, and then re-weld on those two wishbone mounts there. So these outriggers were actually a little bit harder than they initially looked to get them set up right. The main challenge was obviously going to be getting the height of them correct. If we didn't get the height of the outrigger correct, the body was just not going to fit on. I mean, we have seen some in the past where the outriggers actually sit low and they look absolutely horrendous. So what we've done is we ran some steel underneath the chassis from side to side. We made measurements before we actually cut anything, so we knew exactly what height the outrigger needed to be versus the central skeleton of the chassis. So the approach that we took, the horizontal and the diagonal connecting sections that connect the outriggers to the centre of the chassis, we actually managed to locate some interference fit tube. So what we done is we hammered those into the diagonal piece and the horizontal sections. So that was just to give us an extra bit of strength, and it also made sure that ensured that the angles were spot on those pieces that fitted up to the outriggers. And the outrigger itself was dead simple. That was just a single straight piece of pipe, as was that centre horizontal section. So you can see there, if you look closely, those horizontal and diagonal ones with the inserts in the sleeves inside, you can see we've actually plug welded those in place to the new and the old metal, and then everything else was just seam welded together. So once the welding was completed, the question remained, well, what do we do with the rest of the chassis? Do we hand paint it? Do we powder coat it? Well, what I actually found is we found an alternative option, which was e-coating, something we hadn't actually heard of before. It does happen in new car manufacture, and there was a local company who was prepared to take the chassis and they chemically dip it in acid and then they e-coat it. So it's literally a very thin layer of paint that's electrically coated onto the surface of the chassis. So we decided that was going to be the best route, and then on top of that we asked them to put some powder coating on it. So that's what you can see here. This is the chassis just back from the e-coating and powder coating, and again it basically looks like brand new. So we're pretty impressed with that. So with regards to the running gear, we reused as many of the wishbones as we could. Any that were corroded badly were just replaced. As a matter of course, we replaced any of the ball joints, any of the bushes, and obviously the nuts and the bolts. You wouldn't want to go to the extent of doing a body off and then not bothering doing them. The brakes and the suspension, you know, they were cleaned up and repainted because they were functional, as was the steering rack. And then finally the engine and gearbox were fitted, as was the prop, and then the body was lifted back on, and then that remained for then the exhaust manifolds and the rest of the refit to be completed. So let's move on to the car as of 2023. So this is a familiar pose for any TVR owner. Bonnet up, side of the road. It's an end plate, it's a 1996, and it's a Chimaera 400. So yep, it's fitted with a Rover V8, 4 litre in this case, obviously 5-speed manual. And you can see how mint it actually is. What we'll do is we'll attempt to try and get a wee look underneath the chassis, although it has just been MOT'd, so been assured it's still in great condition under here. So there you can see the outriggers along there, running along. It tends to be, you know, this back corner here, you know, where they go, it tends to be above where the body sits, so you don't actually notice that they've gone. And then the same here, they're pretty bad. You can see the centre of the chassis running along there as well. All looks in pretty good condition, to be fair. We'll see if we can get a wee look under the back. Yeah, you can't really see a lot from here. In fact, you can see a wee bit there for that angle. It's all looking pretty good, according to the MOTer as well, so pretty pleased with that. So I guess the part everybody wants to see, the old venerable Rover V8 400. So this has got a SERP front end on it, this one. So it's a little bit later. The one I had, the 93, had the older style SD1 pulleys and stuff on it. And for anybody who hasn't seen under the bonnet of these, there's quite an unusual setup with the exhausts. The headers actually go forwards into a Y piece here, and then you've got a cat in there, and then they go down and under the body, so there just isn't enough space for the exhaust to go that way, because if you look closely there, you'll actually see the chassis rail there. There just isn't the clearance. So quite an unusual setup on these. And you get quite a lot of heat generated. So the current owner, what he's done with this is he's put some heat wrap on here just to try and bring the temperatures down a wee bit under the bonnet. You know, cooling systems at these, you know, are at capacity. I think, you know, you've got a couple of big fans there to try and get air in. You've got some vents in the bonnet as well to let that hot air back out, but they do struggle with cooling, so the radiators and stuff need to be up to spec. I mean, you can see how thick the radiator actually is in it. It's pretty big. But yeah, so this one, when we had it, we didn't actually do an engine rebuild on it from memory. It was a pretty strong engine. It was reasonably high miles, if memory serves me correct. Yeah, so it's sitting at, what's it sitting at now? Just over 100,000 miles. So yeah, so it's definitely well run in. So the hood setup on these is pretty simple. You know, this part just goes into the boot, and then this just folds down. So we'll take a wee look inside. So this is at the point just before they actually moved the door opening button to under the mirror. I forget how low you actually sit in these. Yeah, so you're nice and snug in these. You sit right down, your legs outstretched, which is an ideal position for driving them in. You can see yourself as well the interior, and this is pretty mint. It's a kind of plum carpet with the grey leather, and this is all original. I never had this retrimmed. So obviously had different mats fitted into it. The dashboards had the carbon fibre put on. It would originally been wood trim on that, so that sets it off pretty nicely, and it's also had a different steering wheel on it as well. And yeah, I mean, to fire this roof down, that's all you're doing. You're pulling these down towards you, and then it just folds right back. So that's pretty straightforward. So yeah, they're a really nice place to be inside one of these. And the body on this one, currently, you know, it's in really nice condition. I remember when we had it, I think I had a little bit of a scuff on one of the corners, one of the rear corners, which has since been repaired. But yeah, this colour really stands out. You know, looking down it, there's so many nice design features on these. You know, this sculpted part inside the doors, the bonnet vents, that kind of stuff. And these rear arches that do sit out quite far. You've got the twin exhausts there as well. And these, I'm sure, are Mark III Fiesta rear lights in there. I'm positive they are. You find a lot of parts from other cars on TVRs, which makes it a lot easier when you're restoring them actually, because you get some of them quite cheap. And they sit super low, these things. I mean, if you look how low that's actually sitting to the ground, you know, there's my hand there. There's about 1.5 hands height on those exhausts. I'll get around this side, and this side's pretty much the same. You know, the car's been really well looked after. So I think it's safe to say the restoration carried out nearly a decade ago has lasted pretty well, and it's certainly been a pleasure seeing the old TVR again after all this time. So hopefully it'll be on the road for another 10 years to come, fingers crossed. So I hope everybody's enjoyed this video, and please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all for the next one.